10x is easier than 2x by Dan Sullivan. This was written by the #1 most read writer on Medium for 3 years straight. He grew a 7-figure online training business. I would say this book is kind of similar to Grant Cardone's book in terms of thinking much bigger than the goals you currently have. But there's a big difference. And one is that this book focuses more on quality, whereas Grant Cardone's philosophy centers more on quantity or frequency. So basically, the thesis is that you should set out to do something far beyond anything you've ever done. So big, audacious goals. What you're doing is you're aiming for non-linear progress. Most people reach for just a little bit more, a promotion, a little more money, a new personal record. Going for incremental progress, however, is a 2x mindset. 2x is linear, meaning you're striving to double output by doubling effort. So it's actually very difficult to achieve incremental improvements because often that just means putting in more energy, putting in more hours. Whereas when you start to think much bigger, you start to think about leverage and hacks and tricks and ways of achieving big impact without necessarily putting in a lot more time or a lot more energy. So 10x is really about less. It's about doing less. 10x is about quality over quantity. The greatest human bottleneck is attention. So you need to narrow your focus to the core essential of 10x. So basically identify the main things that you need to be concentrating on. And this is something I'm thinking a lot about lately is what are the main things I need to be doing? Because there's a lot of things I could just get wrapped up in and be doing busy work with, but they're not necessarily the best use of my time. Too many potential pathways or strategies are available when you have very small goals, 2x goals. But what you want to do is make your goal big enough to weed out most directions. Stop almost everything you're doing because it's probably a waste of time anyways. And I think the best example of this is people that waste a lot of time on content marketing or social media posts that are really easy and maybe kind of fun, but don't really generate big results. You want to focus on the very few paths that are going to get you to 10x, that are going to get you to 10x the amount of revenue, 10x the number of customers, however you're phrasing that for your business. Almost everything is noise. Almost everything you're doing now is a distraction from achieving your big, audacious goal. If the goal is big enough, the path to get there becomes almost ridiculously obvious. So for example, that might mean you need to focus on PR because you need to reach way more people than you are now. Or you need to switch from direct response to awareness advertising. Or maybe it means you just need to sell a product that is 100 times as expensive as what you're currently selling. And then maybe it'll be much easier to reach your revenue goals. Or maybe it means you need to sell much larger contracts to much larger businesses and only focus on Fortune 100 clients, things like that. Shift from avoiding what you fear to approaching what you most want. Ask questions like, what would need to be true to generate $10 million within a year? You need to stop micromanaging. You want to hire fast, especially if you're trying to scale up. And you want to focus on things like your core customers. So one example he demonstrates is high stakes freight clients. So clients that have to do with high risk situations are more likely to pay a lot of money, whereas people with regular needs aren't willing to pay that premium. So this company was very successful concentrating there. Or if you're in personal finance, maybe you want to focus on clients who have $100,000 to invest instead of just anyone that walks in the door or picks up the phone. If you're a speaker, you might want to consider raising your speaking fee to a minimum of $50,000 to weed out all those smaller opportunities that are eating up your time. Here's a very interesting quote from Tim Ferriss. The level of competition is thus fiercest for realistic goals. So most people are convinced that they're incapable of great things, so they never even try or they never even apply. So for example, for me, I applied for a very senior level position that I was underqualified for in a Fortune 100 company. Now, I wasn't successful because I was with people who I was comparing myself in a position to people that had twice as much experience as I did, very prestigious pedigree. But what did end up happening was I got the position immediately below that. So setting a big goal means you might achieve a goal that's still substantially higher, even though you don't reach that big audacious goal. The other thing is that the irony, lower paying jobs often have more competition. You would think, oh, the very high paying positions, prestigious positions would be the most competitive. It's not the case because most people aren't confident enough to even apply to those. And we see that a lot of the time where some people will apply for positions where they don't meet all the qualifications and then they get the job, whereas most other people just disqualify themselves. Now, a lot of this 10x mentality is articulated well by Mr. Beast, one of the top YouTubers. It's much easier to get 5 million views on one video than 100,000 views on 50 videos. A 10% better video gets 4 times the view, not 10% more views. Triple the amount of time you're putting into that video can cause you that you're triple the amount of time you're putting into that video because you're not going to get triple the views. You're going to get 10x the views. That's the disproportionate payoff that you get with mastery. Think exponentially, quality over quantity, build a team to scale. If your goal is really big, you don't have to be perfect because you have a huge margin for error. So for example, in my case, where I applied for a position that was out of my league, well, I had a margin of error there. If they end up giving me another position that's a little bit lower, well, I still achieve something great. Get an assistant to handle all your paperwork, logistics, scheduling, so that you can focus on the things that really matter to get you to 10x. And the other thing is you want to focus on who's, not how. So when you have a problem, when you have an obstacle, it's easy to think, how do I fix this? But really, as a leader or somebody that wants to build something large, you need to think about, who do I need to hire or contract to solve this problem, instead of how do I do it myself? Because then you're able to scale and leverage well beyond your own capabilities. Another thing to keep in mind is that results are delayed. And the way I think about this is brands, personal brands, etc., are built very slowly over time. Anything substantial is built over time. So here's an example where a cold call somebody did ended up resulting in $600,000 under management, but it didn't happen until 6 months after the phone call. So you need to focus on the inputs today to get the outputs later. And I think too many people are interested in optimizing for short-term outcomes rather than putting in the effort that's needed now to reap the results later. Kind of like planting a seed now so that harvest time you're able to get the crops. The other thing is to focus on the very beginning of achieving your objective. So for example, writing the first sentence of that press release or of that book. Another thing that we're seeing, for example, with YouTube is the very beginning is becoming more and more important, especially with things like autoplay. So those first 15 seconds, first 5 seconds are critical. In advertising, we call this hook. Hooking people in the very beginning is incredibly important. We see this all the time in entertainment with TV dramas that will start with a murder or somebody falling or some dramatic thing, and then the movie or the show kind of slows down and gets to the main plot. But you got to hook people in the beginning. Your video or product only needs to be 10 or 20% better and different to get 4 to 10x the results. So we see disproportionate payoff there. You don't need to be substantially better. You just need to be a little bit better than average and then gradually get better and better and better. But the payoff is much bigger. It's disproportionate. It's not linear. The rewards are heavily skewed so much that it's typical for number 1 to get 10 times the benefit of number 10 and 100 times the benefit of number 100, Seth Godin. So for example, with SEO, where does most of the traffic go? It's going to go to the very first listing, the second listing. So we see that disproportionate payoff. The more specific and specialized the value you can create, the wealthier you can become. You're creating things that no one else can or would. Being unique and specialized are keys to mastery. They're about focusing on your unique ability where no one is really competing with you. Mastery is not a function of genius or talent. It is a function of time and intense focus applied to a particular field of knowledge. So for me, I started in marketing many years ago, and it wasn't a particularly high-paying job. It was about average or perhaps even below average compared to going into something like finance or some of the other opportunities I had. But because I stuck with it, because I became a master, eventually it became very lucrative, very rewarding because I stuck to it and became a master. And I think that's the challenge a lot of people face is they don't stick with things long enough to achieve mastery. And you can do that in all sorts of fields, design, copywriting, things that sometimes don't even require any high level of investment or high level of education. But if you truly become a master over time, you'll reap the rewards. Whatever you focus on expands. Leverage is key to getting rich because with leverage, the decisions you make have a big effect. So if 100 employees are going to act on the decision you make, then the rewards can be substantial. Now, the losses can also be substantial when you have a leverage, but generally people's psychological bias is that they're disproportionately afraid of loss. That's an inherent bias that people have. So change your mindset and focus on gains. As the performer develops increasingly rare levels of mastery in their craft, they are paid exponentially higher and higher amounts of money for their performances. So stick to what you love, stick to what you can get good at. Now, another huge key to success here is leadership. So let's talk about a few things with leadership. Your team can't scale unless they manage themselves, so don't be a micromanager. You need to focus on what needs to be done, who is doing it now, is this the right person to do it? Replace yourself with better fit leaders the more you scale up. Create a sense of belonging and community. You'll see this in a lot of large companies. They're trying to manufacture awards for best places to work because they want to attract the best talent. Filter out the wrong people fast. So, for example, I recently had somebody who wasn't really getting any good results after 6 months. Very good at some things, but wasn't really getting results in the area that I wanted. So I shifted, and now I'm going to be hiring an agency to do that. And you need to think about what you should be focusing on. So if you're the CEO of your business or you're the head of marketing or head of sales, whatever, what's the best use of your time? And one visual I like to think of is this: Elon Musk, CEO of a major company, highly paid, substantially highly paid person. Where is he spending his time? He's doing things like podcast interviews with Joe Rogan. And that might seem a bit surprising, but if you think about it, a podcast like this really gets huge reach. There are millions of people that are going to look at this. So that is a good use of your time. And think about those scalable opportunities, those things that have big impact to decide where you're going to concentrate your effort.